Welcome to In the Loops podcast. We're here today with Shashank Chaudhary. He's a data analyst at Chartmetric, which is a data analytics company based around driving the music industry with data-based insights and decisions. Shashank has also a Master's of Science in Applied Math or Analytics from Columbia, so he definitely knows what he's talking about when it comes to data and analytics. Shashank, thanks so much for coming out to speak with us on the podcast today. And just to get us started, why don't you tell the audience exactly what Chartmetric is and kind of what's going on with it currently?
Sure. Hey, Thomas. Hey, Sohail. So I came into the music industry about 7, 8 months back. And for me, music industry was a very new spectrum, like a whole new world itself. Like I came from an analytics and engineering background. Getting into Chartmetric, I saw a different whole new world. Like when you're exposed to so much music data, artists, when you come from a neutral perspective, you see, oh my God, there's a huge world out there. And basically what Chartmetric is it's a platform for enabling artists, labels, and a lot of distribution. So to get these stats all, like your streaming stats, your social media stats, all on one platform together. So if anyone asks me, what do you work or which company do you work in? The one-liner would be, it's a platform for artists to get all their streaming and social data at one place.
That's really cool.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that's really cool. Like, I'm also a data analyst, so I see a lot of financial data. So being able to work with music industry data is really cool and super interesting.
Definitely. Finance data, I did it at an MBA too. So I was studying some financial subjects, and I would say music data is way better than finance data. And no personal bias, but yeah.
Definitely more interesting.
Yes.
It's so important too to have a one-liner for you to explain what you do. It's sometimes a little bit hard, so that's funny. I've never heard someone just you need to have the one-liner on deck. But yeah, so you kind of gave us a high-level overview, and I kind of want to continue on that trend. So for someone that is interested in the music industry, whether it's a producer, artist, or musician, or really any other player, what is really the role of data in the music industry?
So data in general has been on the rise, since a long time now, and it's been hitting the music industry also. A lot of these companies, the music industry, they're hiring data scientists, data analysts for working with the data, because there's so much data available now, especially with Spotify, Apple Music, Deezer, Pandora, different platforms. There's huge amounts of data. And data is something very powerful. It gives you insights. And it's not only about insights, it's actionable insights, like what actions you can take with the help of these data. So it's very important to get this data in place and then use it also. And for artists especially, it's now a global platform. It's not only limited to only a city or probably only a country. Now you're serving the whole world together. So it's very important for you to make use of this data. Now, getting to the question, how can data be used by these artists themselves? There are different metrics altogether. So let's get into streaming first. So we have Spotify streams, we have Apple Music playlists, number of playlists an artist gets on, editorial or non-editorial. You can break it down further into. And stuff like this, small metrics add up together. How many views you had, how many likes, getting into social media, how many likes, how many dislikes, how many comments, and stuff like this. Artists come to know how and which users are they engaging with. Knowing your users is one big important part of being an artist. You need to know what audience are you catering to, what genre are the audience interested in, and probably which audience likes what genre of music. So this in total encapsulates everything, whatever data we collect. This is what helps artists to grow. They are catering to Chicago, they are holding a live performance in Chicago. Probably they'll have a bigger, wider audience, who hears different kinds of genres. But the same can be not said for if they're probably gonna host a live festival in some other city, which might have some different audience genres. So audience demographics, that's what might help artists too. So yeah, this is just the tip of the iceberg, sort of.
Right.
I'm just giving it.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's amazing.
Go ahead. Yeah. So like you said, you talked about like a lot about the audience and everything. Who does Chartmetric usually work with? Is there like any famous people, or is it just like any type of artist?
So we have right now on our database, we just crossed 5 million mark artists. Like it was recent, and we usually work with labels and artists themselves, like upcoming artists who are trying to see where they are going with their music and stuff. So essentially, what I'll come back to the point where how you can use these marketing campaigns are a big part of artists themselves. So what I was working on a recent project was predictions using predictive analytics to help artists budget themselves and see how much money that they can spend on Facebook campaigns, Instagram campaigns, and stuff like that to reach their goal. They might have some particular goal in mind. Probably they have to reach 200,000 audiences across the globe. So in how much time and how much money they should spend on a campaign, because on a campaign you can spend billions and millions and you can go nowhere, and it can be the other way around too. You have limited resources at your hand, so you have to maximize those things. And maximizing them is where we can help sort of grow. Like we know which sort of, we can help you with which sort of playlist to get onto to widen your reach, which tracks are trending, which genres are more happening. So there's a concept called trigger cities, which was an article written by like my colleagues in our company itself. It's very simple. The concept is like there are cities which play a big role in your streaming. Like they might not be originally from your country itself, where we're trying to serve your markets, but it might be a different country altogether. So, for example, we had this artist. I don't recollect it, but his name was there. He was serving a country, like his audience was catering to the city in US. But when he went and like we were seeing his breaking down in his monthly listeners, Spotify monthly listeners, the top 5 cities, it was surprisingly the Southeast Asian countries. So if he tries to market them probably he'll have a bigger, huge number of streams coming into picture. So this way you can like probably market and strategize yourself to these sort of cities and countries using this data.
It almost reminds
sounds
me
like something that like Drake Bell did, but like as controversial as he was, like his music was doing really well in South America, and he moved actually down there to like pretty much grow himself as an artist, which is like really cool.
Yes.
Yeah. It almost reminds me of Moneyball in a sense, like when they figure out the trick to like recruiting baseball athletes is like not going for top prospects, but looking at the statistics under it and finding almost like, I guess similar to what you were saying, like trigger cities, or like finding stats that are like, oh, you know, this combined with that will be more successful. And yeah, I mean, I'm curious. So do a lot of artists kind of create actionable insights for touring or like releases based off of those trigger cities, or do they also come up with other kind of insights like given that information?
So trigger cities is just a new concept. Like it's a concept which we are working like towards to find these cities over there. Like most of these cities we identified were Southeast Asian cities. There were South American cities also involved there. Mexico, for example. There were, like if you go to Southeast Asian cities, there is Quebec, there is Philippines and stuff like that. So this is one part of it, like how artists design their tours. But the second part is, as I said, the demographics. That plays a very huge role in deciding what and where the audience which audience wants to listen to what sort of music. That's like you're catering to the audience itself, and wherever you have a larger audience, that will obviously help you with the ticket sales and stuff like that.
Right.
So the trigger cities is just one part of the story, but there are different sort of segments to it.
So for a like new coming artists, like ones that are probably using in the loop, like how should they use this data? Like I'm assuming that you have data for a lot of bigger artists and stuff like that, but for someone that's just starting off, how should they look at data to help them improve?
So for an upcoming artist, like for any artist actually, it plays a huge role, like how they leverage the data, because we have a lot of tools available now. Nowadays, like you have Spotify for Artists, you have Chartmetric, you have SoundCloud, you have different tools available. But to leverage it is one thing. Like it's a very rare combination for an artist to be like a very small chunk of artists would be having a data knowledge, but it's essential now. Like to grow for them, it's very important for them to have these. So I'll get into the question straight away. So we have a lot of data, such as listeners, views, saves. So I'll give you a very simple example. Spotify for Artists itself, it gives you how many times a person has listened to a song, how many saves were done, and how many times like the song was downloaded, added to another playlist. So from that these simple metrics, an artist can know that probably, my diss track is doing well. It's been added to these playlists. And however small that artist's reach may be, he can reach out to those people on the playlist who are adding him, and you can send him new songs, new tracks, which will just be the word of mouth growth, sort of like you reaching out to one person and this guy likes something and then he will recommend it to another person. That's how small scale artists can grow themselves. And this effect is cascading. It just multiplies. Like one person tells to another, and then 2 people talk to 4 people, and it just grows. So this is as simple as it gets. This is nothing but data analytics. That's the simplest form of data analytics. You just seeing your listeners, how many saves, and you're just growing from there. So this is the basics. Now getting into more intricate stuff, like more high level. So you want to see which streams, where are you getting your streams from? As city level data, country level data. So you will probably go there, and you want to release your, like, you probably might want to release your tracks in such a way that you're catering to these sort of people over there. And yeah, so getting these Spotify streams, Pandora streams, different metrics on Apple Music, the number of playlists. We identified playlists is a very big factor also, like to exponentially grow your audience, getting onto the Spotify editorial playlist. It's a big thing for any artist. And how do we get on those playlists? So there are multiple ways. Like you probably land on one playlist, which is a small playlist. So we have this tool on our application. It's called Playlist Journeys. It shows you how a track was added to this playlist and like what playlist were they on before and after being added on track. So it's pretty interesting, like because this was like designed by one of our data scientists, this tool. So yeah, it's a pretty interesting tool, and this gets into more details and more technical level, like sort of where artists can understand how they are going from, like where the track is traveling from one playlist to another.
That's really interesting too, like thinking about how playlists play such a huge role. I mean,
yes.
It's such a huge editorial thing. Actually, I had a friend who worked on a Spotify playlist, and it was totally just out of the blue. But I mean, like I'm sure thinking about that now, I mean that could be potentially someone's livelihood on the line if they get on that playlist or if they don't.
I've actually seen someone on like TikTok, and their entire account is based around like making playlists for people. And a lot of people follow him just so that like they can look at his music whenever he adds it to a certain playlist.
Exactly. We recently, a project of ours is revolving around playlists itself, like how playlists can help upcoming artists grow. Like which playlist do you need to be landing on? Like which playlist do you need to be hitting to grow your audience wider? So it's very interesting to look at, and we recently saw a PhD level paper. We just discussing with some of our folks who are using our data, and they were doing very interesting stuff with playlists. Like they had formed some certain metrics, and it was pretty like technical. They were forming machine learning models behind that for seeing how much popular, like if you want to sign a new artist, how much like his similarities score, like that's getting into technical details, but yeah, like pretty interesting stuff happening behind a lot of these playlists. And we actually have one of our colleagues, Michael Warner, who has a whole book on it. It's called Work Hard Playlist Hard. So it's a whole
That's
book
funny.
together. Yes.
That's a nice
I have to check it out. I'm curious, have you ever, I'm sure you have, but have you ever heard of the Musical Genome Project, which was under, I think created by Pandora? It's kind of like a undertaking they have to create like the DNA, or almost like a DNA characteristic or sequence for music, and that's essentially what is behind their, like, you know, the recommendation engine, or at least from what I know. I'm sure there's probably a lot of other stuff, but to me that's interesting, and I'm sure I'd be curious to get your take from Chartmetric. Kind of, where do you think that things like musical DNA, in a sense, have any presence in the kind of like charting and data analytics world with music? I know it's a long question, but I'm curious if diving into that is almost an area of analysis, or if that's more so just like a background area.
So right now, one of our data engineers was talking about this, like about this music DNA and stuff. Like, I might be completely wrong. Like, correct me if I'm wrong. Like, it's, if you play some tune, you can actually identify the song itself. Is it something to do with? Is it something similar, or is it something I'm going off?
I feel like it's like a lot of music are very similar to one another, and that like a specific type of music or like way of music is played is going to be like trending or whatever. Because like maybe a few years ago, mumble rapping was the new thing. Now it's like lo-fi hip hop or something like that. Like there's just different genres that just take over the trend.
That's completely like it's a new field that's coming up. Like for us, it's still in the works. We're working towards it, but it's definitely interesting to see how this develops, because analytics itself, it's growing in this field. So as I said, like as we get more and more data, like this, I'm sorry, like more of a this I cannot put, like, it's difficult to comprehend. Yeah, just keep it very in simple language. It's
right.
It's more of like how much data we have and what we can do with this music DNA. Like, as I said, like one of our engineers is working towards having this sort of similar songs which you are matching together to see, like, to match. If you just hum the tune itself, you can actually know which song it is. Like, it's I don't know about this musical DNA,
right?
But,
yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to spring that. It's pinned. Yeah. Yeah, because I guess my train of thought with that is we have these data points that are, monthly listeners or playlists, like the metrics we were just talking about. And to me, the natural progression is, okay, after that, maybe down the line, it's like a score of like, musical DNA related things. Like, I know Spotify has a few categories like that, but like, I don't know, maybe it's like influence from like 70s hip hop and then like 80s synth rock. And like, for me, I'm wondering, will that become a metric later? And will we be able to look at those metrics and say, like, you know what, like in the late 2020s, this was how you got to the top 10. And I don't know, that's just kind of like my progression with it, but I think that's an interesting area. But it's really interesting seeing how like recommendation algorithms are kind of picking up on that. Some with like making radios, stuff like that. But yeah, that was my tangent on that.
So I know for one thing that Spotify itself has a very huge data team which sort of combines these things to make they have a lot of genres itself. I think they have 100+ genres itself for clustering the music tracks all together into like different clusters. And I think that's where you're going towards, like specific tracks such as lo-fi and like hip hop, like you have very specific categories of songs, like sleep-inducing songs. You have study songs
Yeah.
and stuff like these. There's a lot of variety of genres itself, and that's where the genre, like we're working on a genre project, and it gets complicated because we used to understand that probably we have 5 or 10 genres, like the main big ones, hip hop. But now these are being broken down into different sort of subgenres, where these are very particular synth music orchestra and all these very specific genres come into picture. And from the artist perspective, it's very difficult to understand like what sort of genre are you going, because you make music,
Right.
you have a very wide like view of the track you're going to make. But when you get into these sort of music, these particular genres on what you want to serve, then it gets very like difficult and it gets sort of complex, and to put it in simple terms.
I mean, then it's hard sometimes to like find the line between a genre. And I mean, as you can see on Spotify and Apple Music, there's so many like genre bending playlists, or I mean playlists that are based off of an adjective that you can't really even pinpoint what you're listening to.
It's a mess. Like we're trying to tag each of our tracks for like what genres do they land, and how do you categorize them? Like, because you are having, like, we have different sources of different data coming in from Apple Music, Amazon, Spotify, and they tag the track as like we have different genre tags tagged to those same tags. Now, to display it on our front end, like how do we decide which genre is apt sort of for that track? That's something which we're working towards, like displaying the top 5. How do we display it? So sometimes there are different tags, sort of pop. Maroon 5 itself, Adam Levine has. If you tag him, he's a pop artist, but himself individually, the tracks he produced. It's a different sort of genre which comes out. So this is a very like sort of field which is adding more and more genres to it, and it gets difficult for artists and for us to like from an analyst perspective to understand. Oh, this guy is in pop also, and he's probably hitting soft rock too. Wow, that's a beauty combination.
I mean, aside from like different genres and everything, how is it like the analytics different for like different languages and stuff like that? Because I feel like with like Bollywood music and stuff like that, it's completely different from American music.
For sure. Bollywood artists are like, it's something very different, like how their strategy works and how probably the artists in US work. It's traditionally now converging to the same way. A lot of independent artists are coming up in Bollywood too, like in India itself. Traditionally, what happens in Bollywood is the artist release these tracks. It's in usually a film. It comes with the film. Like usually whatever tracks are coming out, it's usually through a film itself. Some big Bollywood actor launches his film, and there are these 5 to 6 tracks in the film itself, which get pretty big, famous and hits. But now, since like, as we mentioned, like now the audience is going global. Like for an artist, it's just not through the film itself. You can get onto Spotify, you can get onto Apple Music, and this is encouraging solo artists to get recognition, not just from the film side, but from actually using these platforms itself. Now, this is very similar to this case in the US too. Like a lot of artists are coming up through these different platforms. This was not the case in US. Like that's what something coming from India I know about. Like usually people in Bollywood, like those are the tracks which artists want to be on. Sort of like they want to be the voice behind the films. But now they are getting a platform where sort of they are diversifying. Like they are coming up with the solo tracks individual. Instagram, Facebook, these are playing huge roles in sort of encouraging them to go out and be heard of. And this is where the analytics part, the question of analytics comes into picture. Like sort of that's also taking gaining traction. So you might have seen a lot of movies on Netflix, right? There are a lot of background scores also. So similar to that, music syncs. That's where I'm getting at. Like, sort of these songs which are playing in the background, they also play a huge role in getting these traction onto the shows itself. So someone might wonder probably that, oh, this song is playing in the background, and how much of this show's popularity is attributed to that song. Probably that song is a big hit, or it might become a big hit because of the show, or vice versa. So that's very interesting, like to see the correlation between the songs and the shows itself. And this is not something just particular shows I'm talking about. It might be in the gaming industry also. It's picking up a lot. EA Sports, like
that was actually my next question too.
Yes, so we play games a lot, right? Like FIFA tracks. People just sometimes, like for me, I play FIFA a lot sometimes, and I just pick up tracks from there. Like, you like those tracks and you put it on those playlists. So that's one important metric, sort of like where you want to land in those sort of areas where you hit with the audience, and the audience actually goes and puts you in their playlist. So that's, you're widening your reach automatically. So that sort of analytics is very interesting. Like, you see how like EA Sports, Epic Games, they are using these tracks to like gain more audience, in short.
It's funny. I actually discovered the artist Phony People through like an NBA 2K game. And I saw on the article you worked on with like looking at Color Studios and NPR Tiny Desk concerts, like their impact on audiences. Phony People was on there, and it's almost like full circle now, like talking about how those people can get discovered. And yeah, I mean, it's really crazy too, because I feel like placement is just growing in places. I mean, I know like Fortnite has like concerts now, and I mean, that's stuff like that is just so creative.
Certainly, like there are different platforms where like music is getting into like different industries now. Sort of, we covered gaming, we covered probably the entertainment industry. So it's getting into like all these different places, and artists should explore all these options, in short, like sort of how do we get there, how do we reach. And that's something what data is backed up by. Like you see these stats, and then you can get on those places there. And that's where analysts come into picture. Like you sort of see, right.
I also wanted to bring up the 6MO like industry report. I don't know if it's pronounced MO or Mo, but yeah, I was looking through that, and it's really interesting to see like you and the rest of the other people at Chartmetric like breaking down, you know, like stuff like Olivia Rodrigo and like attributing her crazy success to like actual things. I mean, it was definitely her album, but also just observing that growth. And then all of the other artists on there, it was really interesting too, seeing like international talent as well. Like I think you were mentioning a few artists from Brazil on there, and just like seeing the industry at scale like that is so interesting. And I'm curious, were there any like surprises you had while looking at that stuff and generating those reports, or just want to get your thoughts on that?
Oh, sure. So 6MO is like for all listeners. It's usually a 6 month. The name is 6MO because it's a 6 month report. We release it every 6 months, and we usually try to analyze what were the top upcoming artists on sort of whatever platforms we have available in our database. So be it Spotify, Instagram, Deezer, Pandora, Shazam. We analyze we launched a report in around February for the period of December, probably August of previous year to the month of December. So during this period, we see which artist, going back to those metrics, like probably Spotify monthly listeners, which had the highest gain. And we usually add a threshold because there are a lot of because just in pure mathematical terms, if you grow from 1 to 2, you're growing 100%. But if you're growing from 100 to 200, like that's more growth, sort of like. So we usually add a threshold. So like we need to have a threshold of minimum of probably 500,000 monthly listeners minimum, so that we can have those genuine cases which are going on the rise from a very small number to probably in billions or millions for Spotify monthly listeners, or probably Spotify streams. So in short, like we analyze these top, like for each category, we have these top 10 artists, and there's a theme behind every 6MO. For the last theme probably was trigger cities. And for this time, we had gender metadata. So getting back to the question, are there any surprises? We always have one or like, because data is a bit messy, like in music industry, like it gets very messy. Like for example, TikTok streams and counts, they round it off. And there are multiple, for YouTube, there are multiple links associated for each and every track. For one particular artist, there might be one track he's releasing, and there might be 3 or 4 multiple links attached to that. So cleaning that and getting that polished so that it's presentable more, like the numbers are realistic, and we cross-check it once. We actually go look back what caused that growth. So as you mentioned, Olivia Rodrigo, she was there in all of our sort of top 10 emerging artists. Like she was on top of the charts for everything. And it's not a surprise. Like she hit all the right metrics. She was on all the major playlists. She probably crossed like a lot of Instagram followers. Like her growth was phenomenal in this past 6 months. And there were some Brazilian actors which like there were some sentimental sort of values behind them, if I'm not mistakenly. They had released their sort of some family good, like they had their engagement and stuff like that. So doing that, and there was this artist. Okay, so Amongst Us is a very popular game, and I think the artist name was Scorps. Like he was a YouTube streamer for this game Amongst Us, and what happened was his popularity picked up, and he started streaming these new sort of like more catered towards horror. Like his YouTube streams were more catered towards horror and stuff. And now he picked up on Wikipedia. I think the platform was Wikipedia, if I'm not mistaken. And you see his Wikipedia views went up because people were trying to search for him online. Oh, what's this about? What's this about? And yeah, like sort of this, like our Wikipedia list itself had a lot of artists which were like deceased, because popularity picks up after someone like usually goes away. So yeah, so there are a lot of interesting finds because behind this behind the scenes, and we filter out a lot of artists because there might be some cartoon characters in there for all like purposes, and you don't want them to be in the top 10 list.
Right.
So there's a lot of, like, it's a teamwork. The 6MO really gets like intense, and then you work towards your theme itself. So this time the theme was around gender metadata, and that's something we could like talk about. So yeah, this was about the 6MO.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about the gender, like pronoun, like data set. Is that kind of related to that, or is that something else?
So this was a very interesting initiative we took upon, because we know we did not have any data to back us up, but we know it's sort of like more male artists and more male dominated industry, the music industry itself. But we did not have numbers to back it up because we did our research online. Like before getting into this project itself, we did our research. Like we are trying to find data sets which are already present, and we could not find a lot of substantial data behind pronouns and genders. So that's an idea we came up for this theme of 6MO, and it just went and multiplied itself. Like it's something we are still working on, and it's a continuous process because, so if you may, I can like explain the mythology behind and the ideology, what was going behind scenes.
Go ahead.
Absolutely.
Sure. So coming up with this project, as I said, there's you do not have numbers to back it up, and the first place sort of our team played was to find any existing study which goes on. Again, we are no experts in this field itself, in the gender pronoun data field. But one certain idea struck to us, that we have Spotify bios of these artists. And it's usually made by the artists themselves or someone under them or someone handling their social media and stuff like that. So over there, the pronouns they might use is something which we can probably use it and come up with these pronouns and assigning them to the artists themselves. So our machine data scientist, she extracted all the pronouns from these gender Spotify bios, and extracting them, we categorize them into he, him, she, hers, they, thems. Now, this itself is a multi-level problem because you can assign he, him, and she, hers very easily from the bios itself, like the counts of actual number of occurrences of these words. But when it comes to they and them, it can be probably for a band, like altogether it's a collective noun. So it can be for a band itself, or there can be neutral pronouns also, because usually it's neutral pronouns are also they and them. So what we did was we extracted this, and our business intelligence analyst, she was going through the list manually, checking it, because we do not have any way of checking it from any other source. So we actually go into their artists, which are well-known artists, and manually checking for their pronouns itself, if they came out or something like that. And there was one more, another problem was categorizing them as bands, because how would you assign a gender or pronoun to a band itself?
Yeah.
Right.
So that's a different sort of we tackle that at a later stage. But coming back to this he, him. So we extracted around in the first go, we extracted around 450,000 artists, around that number. There was another problem involved here, and that was not all Spotify bios are in English. We are looking at only he, him, or she, hers, and these are all English. So we wanted to be as inclusive as possible in this process. So for the non-English bios, we listed around 1.3 or 1.4 thousand artists from there too. And we were manually going through this list. It's a very tedious process, and it is. It sounds pretty tedious. Yeah. So, but we finally got to a list where we had compiled a big data set where we had English and non-English bios, and the pronouns were assigned to these artists themselves. And for our testing purposes, we took a sample of 1,000 artists, and we removed artists which did not have a bio and probably were not in the traditional English language, because we had a separate list for non-English bios. We cross-checked those results, and accuracy was around 90% using the automated process, using the extraction of pronouns. So we went ahead and did this for whatever artists we had in our database, and we got data for around 450,000 artists. And that's how we came up with this gender metadata sort of data set. And this was the pronoun data set actually. The gender data set itself was a different data set. Again, it involved a lot of manual work itself, but we generated around 3,000, a data set for around 3,000 artists themselves. And yeah, this was how we came up with this gender metadata, and this was the theme of the 6th demo. And using this data, you can slice and dice across genre, across gender, and you can come to know actually how these metrics, how these metrics are. They actually show you the goal of this was to highlight the inequality, sort of how this industry is dominated by sort of males, and how you can raise your voice, and you probably not raise your voice, but raise your concern, sort of oh, we should be more inclusive towards the women or the non-binary artists themselves. And yeah, that's the whole process altogether.
That's a really interesting undertaking, and I mean, I know like there's also a lack of consistency and norm and regularity with metadata in music. I'm sure it's a lot of varying data sources and stuff that gets lost in translation. And that I know you were talking about like cleaning up data a little earlier. What are some of like the more common like just issues with when you're dealing with like this data at scale?
Primary keys.
For sure, for sure. So for that part, I am very thankful to our data team because to come up with a ID like for every artist in our database, we have this primary key for every artist, and I don't know when you get technical, but they have this Chartmetric ID assigned to them, and each Chartmetric ID in our database, it's unique for each and every artist. Now. Like we extract data for different platforms. How do we aggregate that? That's where we'll have linkages for like one Chartmetric ID, we are linking it to Apple ID, their Spotify ID, and stuff like that. And it doesn't stop there. Like data itself gets messy more and more as we go into more and more sort of tracking to tracks and stuff like that. So for like as I mentioned before, TikTok itself, the data gets messy because they have a lot of a different way of sort of giving data. Sort of TikTok post itself, they round it off, and usually what happens is there are a lot of different links for the same artist, and you do not know which one is the actual artist itself because So where do you track data from? And very similar problem to YouTube too, because there are different tracks. Like there might be some covers coming up for that same track, and the actual link gets lost. And if we are tracking data for YouTube views, for example, for a particular day, we might be getting data from like a cover of that song, a cover of that song, and then so on and so forth. And there might be probably 5 or 6 links linked to that same track. And your views might spike up a lot because you're aggregating all these views together. And that data is actually not correct. It's essentially like you might have launched it for one single track on YouTube, but it's not correct because you're getting aggregated sort of views from all these 5 different links. So yeah, the data gets messy. It's
I can't imagine the complexity that you guys must have to deal with in getting correct data. Oh my gosh.
Is Chartmetric doing any predictive analysis on like what genres are the next big thing?
It's not actually directly to the genres itself. Like we are brainstorming towards this predictive. I myself was working on time series based predictive analytics, not something like very complicated. It's just like you're using sort of historical data, whatever you have in the past 6 or a year period, and then trying to forecast how it's going to be in the next quarter or next 6 months or something like that. But this, like, what do you talk about? Like, I was just talking with Jason, my manager, and we're talking about how we want to like develop a data set itself, sort of which can see what, as you said, like a genre. It itself is a, how do you put these? Basically, it's a problem of clustering, right? Like when you're assigning genre clusters, and how do you assign them?
There's so many genres.
Yes, exactly. So that's something we're working towards because we're trying to make a data set itself, and we're trying to find those metrics which are actually evident and which actually are sort of significant towards, like we're trying to see correlations between different metrics itself, and we want to add them to the data set so that it forms a meaningful relationship, and we could actually have something which we can predict for these tracks, like to put it into these clusters itself. So that's something we're looking forward, and we're trying to like work towards it. But yes, certainly we're working. Like that's some project which I myself personally am working on.
I guess for like some final thoughts, if I was like a new producer or whatever, or an artist, what are some tips that you would give as a data analyst in music?
So, as a data analyst, like for any artist out there, like sort of data is in abundance. Like there are a lot of tools, but to use it in a wise way, like probably in a smart way. Like not a lot of artists are doing that. Probably like, I might have a very biased or sort of narrow view, but not a lot of artists are using the data way the meaningful results you can get out of it. I myself am very new into this industry and sort of getting to know a lot of new stuff every day. But data itself has a lot of power in itself. Like big labels use data every day, like tracking and picking up these tracks. They want to monitor which songs are trending on TikTok itself. And TikTok is one of the major platforms where a song goes viral very easily. So sort of which audience are you catering to? What demographics? These, getting back to the playlist points, these are like very few simple metrics. The marketing campaigns which artists go around, you have a lot of data in that too. Like you can play with a lot of filters in there. When you're having a marketing campaign on Instagram or Facebook, you can play around with a lot of filters, like which industry, how much money, how much budget, which city, and stuff like that. And from that simple sort of analytics, like probably this city, I'm gaining more listeners. So catering something towards that, like probably having a live audience, and whenever they're trying to plan a concert or something like that, they can keep in mind all this data points itself in back of their head and just go with whatever the data says. Like, because intuition is one thing. Like you can probably go wrong or right with intuition, but data, when you're talking about data, quantitative and qualitative data, you cannot probably majority of the times you cannot go wrong. Yes.
Well, I think honestly we're almost at time. I just wanted to give a little bit of time. Is there anything you wanted to shout out or anything you'd like to promote on the podcast while we're still on here?
For sure. Like shout out to my team. Like they're giving me like having confidence, and like as you said, like data is messy, and shout out to all the data engineers and all the people who work in Chartmetric. So yeah, like. And by the way, we are launching a website for the gender pronoun data set. We have launched it. It's called makemusicequal.chartmetric.com. And we are actually launching it tomorrow. Yes, on Women's Day Equality nice. And the data set is available for everybody to use, because we did not want to it was not for any monetary purpose. It was to put it out there for everyone to see and make interesting insights out of it. So yeah, we are launching that initiative tomorrow, and that's no better place to speak about it here.
Yeah, congrats on that. That's amazing.
Thank you.
It's great that
really
it's coming
cool.
Well, I mean, honestly, thank you so much for coming and speaking with us.
Thank you a lot.
Amazing
this will
to
be
hear.
Very beneficial for anyone listening. I feel like a lot of artists don't really think about data when they're trying to grow as a person and as a producer and everything.
Hey, props to you all for having me here, and talking about all this stuff. It's really helpful for the artists out there to know what all goes behind the scenes. So thanks, Thomas and Sohail.
Yeah. Well, I guess for all of our listeners, check out the website that's coming up soon, and stay in tune for other stuff going on with Chartmetric and In the Loop. And yeah, I guess that's it. Yeah, stay in the loop.